Verith Station never slept. It hummed and rattled at all hours, filled with the noise of 100 different species moving cargo, making deals, and arguing over prices in languages that had no common words. Ships docked and undocked constantly. The air smelled like engine oil, alien food, and something sharp that nobody had ever been able to name. It was loud, crowded, and always a little dangerous, which made it a perfect place for people who did not want to be found. Lena Carver had been coming to Verith Station for 3 years. She knew the back corridors, the cheap fuel suppliers, and which food stalls would not make her sick. She was not tall, not particularly strong, and she did not carry a weapon in plain sight. What she did carry was a sharp pair of eyes and a very low tolerance for being cheated. She flew cargo for anyone who paid fairly and asked few questions. Her ship, a mid-range hauler she called the Drift, was old but reliable, mostly. Right now it was neither, because the secondary drive coupling had cracked somewhere between the last two systems and she could smell the burn every time she pushed past half speed. She needed a mechanic. A good one. A cheap one. She had asked around the docking bay for an hour and gotten nowhere useful. The certified engineers at the station wanted too much money. The cheaper ones looked at the Drift and shook their heads. One of them actually laughed. Lena was starting to consider doing the repair herself, which would have been a disaster, when she noticed him. He was sitting on an overturned crate near Bay 37, working on something small in his hands. Human, male, somewhere in his mid-30s, with plain dark hair and the kind of face that was easy to forget. He wore simple work clothes and no insignia of any kind. There was nothing about him that asked for attention. In a station full of beings who were always performing in some way, showing off armor, rank patches, expensive tools, this man was doing the opposite. He was simply there, quiet, doing his work. What caught Lena's eye was not him, but the ship behind him. It was a Grethian hauler, a big ugly vessel owned by a crew of 4 armed traders who were known for being difficult. The ship had been sitting in Bay 37 for 2 days. Lena had heard 3 different mechanics had refused the job. Something with the ion manifold, people said. Too tangled. Not worth the trouble. The quiet man was fixing it. He was not hurrying. He was not asking anyone for help. He had a small kit of tools open beside him, and he worked through the problem the way someone might work through a puzzle, patiently, methodically, occasionally holding a part up to the light before deciding what to do with it. The Grethian crew stood nearby watching him, and they were doing something Lena had never seen that crew do before. They were being quiet. She walked over and leaned against the wall a few feet away. She watched him work for about 5 minutes. In that time, he replaced 2 components, rerouted a feed line, and did something with a diagnostic tool that made the ship's ambient hum shift from unhealthy to smooth. The Grethian crew leader made a low sound that, in their language, meant something close to relief. The man wiped his hands on a cloth, looked at the ship for a moment, and then began packing his tools. Lena stepped forward. "That ship has been sitting there for 2 days," she said. He looked at her. His eyes were a plain dark brown and gave nothing away. "Ion manifolds are not complicated," he said. "People just do not like getting into the housing." "I have a cracked drive coupling," she said. "Secondary line. I can smell the burn at 0.6 thrust." He was quiet for a second. "What kind of ship?" "Drift-class hauler. About 14 years old. Previous owner did some modifications to the coolant system that I think are making it worse." He nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they are already thinking through the problem in their head. "I can look at it," he said. His name was Ethan Cole. He said it simply, offered no rank, no credentials, no list of past jobs. Lena told him her name. They walked to the Drift together and he spent 40 minutes going through the drive compartment without saying much. When he came out, he told her exactly what was wrong, why the previous owner's modifications had made it worse, and what it would take to fix it properly. He quoted her a price that was so reasonable she immediately assumed she had misheard him. She had not misheard him. She watched him work through the afternoon. He was fast, but not careless. He explained things when she asked and did not explain things when she did not. He found a second problem she had not known about and fixed that too without charging extra. By the time the station lights shifted to their evening cycle, the Drift felt like a different ship. Lena was thinking about the next leg of her route. She needed a co-pilot for the longer runs, someone who could handle the ship if she needed to sleep, and someone who could fix things when they broke down in deep transit. She had been doing it alone for months, and it was wearing her down. She made the offer plainly. Co-pilot and engineer, split of the cargo pay, no fixed contract. Ethan considered it for a moment. Just a moment. Then he said yes. What Lena did not notice, or did not know how to read, was the reaction of a Crethean merchant named Vorok, who had been watching from the far side of the bay. Vorok was large even by Crethean standards, with a trader's eye for detail and a long memory. He had been on Vareth Station for 11 years. He had seen a lot of things. He watched Ethan Cole agree to board Lena's ship, and something moved behind his eyes that was not quite fear but was close to it. He approached Lena quietly, just before she walked back to the drift. He spoke low, as if he did not want to be heard. He told her that hiring that particular human might bring a kind of attention she was not prepared for. He was not specific. He did not give reasons. He simply said it, watching her face. Lena looked at him the way she looked at anyone who tried to give her vague warnings. She thanked him for his concern and walked away. That evening, as the drift pulled out of Vareth Station and turned toward the transit lane, Ethan Cole sat in the co-pilot seat and looked out at the stretch of stars ahead. His hands were resting in his lap. His face was calm. He looked like a man with no particular history, going nowhere in particular. Lena glanced at him once, then turned her eyes back to the navigation display. She thought she had hired a mechanic. Dust Point was the kind of place that existed because it had to. It sat at the junction of 3 mid-range transit lanes, far enough from any major system to be inconvenient, but close enough to be necessary. Ships stopped there to refuel, to trade, and sometimes to wait out the kind of trouble that needed a little time before it died down. The station itself was old and showed it. The walls were patched in at least 6 different materials. The lighting was uneven. The docking fees were low and the questions were lower. Lena brought the drift in on a standard approach, nothing unusual, just a fuel stop and a chance to stretch. Ethan had been quiet for most of the transit, which she was learning was simply how he was. He was not cold or unfriendly. If she asked him something, he answered. If she needed help with the ship, he was there before she finished asking. He just did not fill silence with noise the way most people did, and after a while she found she did not mind it. They docked at Bay 9. Ethan went to check the fuel connections, while Lena headed for the station's common area to find something that resembled food. Dust Point had a bar that served 3 different species and made no promises about the rest. She took a seat near the wall, ordered something she recognized, and let herself breathe for a few minutes. That was when she saw the old man go pale. He was sitting 2 tables over, a weathered human in his late 60s, with the thick hands of someone who had spent a lifetime doing manual work. She had noticed him when she came in, the way you notice anyone who has been somewhere long enough to become part of the furniture. He had been leaning back with a drink, relaxed, watching the room with the comfortable disinterest of a man who had seen everything. Then Ethan walked in. The old man's eyes landed on Ethan and something happened to his face. The color left it. Not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily, the way light leaves a room when a cloud moves over the sun. He sat up very slowly. He looked at Ethan for one long moment, then he picked up his drink, stood up with great care, and walked out through the side door without a word to anyone. He did not look back. Lena watched this and said nothing. Ethan had not seemed to notice. He got himself a drink, came to her table, and sat down. They talked about the next leg of the route for a few minutes. Normal conversation. She kept the other thing in the back of her mind. The trouble came about an hour later. A Sovereign Fleet patrol unit came through the docking ring with a specific kind of efficiency that meant they were not just passing through. 3 ships, marked with the silver and blue of the Sovereign Authority, docked in the outer bays. Their commander came aboard the station with 6 officers. She was a reptilian Vrethian named Wyssila, lean, precise, with the flat eyes of someone who had been doing this work for a long time and found it neither enjoyable nor unpleasant. Just work. The Sovereign Fleet had jurisdiction over most of the mid-range lanes. Routine inspections were legal and not uncommon. Most people tolerated them the way you tolerate bad weather, with patience and mild irritation. Lena watched the patrol move through the common area and told herself it was nothing. Then Waisasila saw Ethan. It was a small thing. Most people would have missed it. Waisasila's scan of the room was professional and even, passing over each face, each table, cataloging. But when her gaze reached Ethan, it stopped. Just for a half-second. No more than that. Then it moved on, and she continued her sweep as if nothing had happened. But her posture had changed. Something had tightened. The patrol worked through the station methodically, checking ships and cargo. They came to the drift last. Lena stood at the ramp with her papers ready, keeping her expression neutral. Ethan stood slightly behind her, hands in his pockets, looking at nothing in particular. Waisela stepped up to them. She looked at the papers. She looked at the ship. And then, instead of addressing Lena, which was standard, since Lena was the registered captain, she turned to Ethan. She spoke a single sentence. It was not in any language Lena knew. Ethan answered in the same language. Fluently, without a pause, without any particular expression. It was a short exchange, maybe 4 sentences each, and then Waisela looked at him for one long moment, nodded once with a formality that bordered on ceremony, and moved away. Her officers followed. They left the drift without inspecting it further. Lena waited until they were out of earshot. "What language was that?" she asked. "Vrithian," Ethan said. "Old form. They do not use it much anymore." "And what did she say to you?" A pause. "She asked if I was passing through." "What did you tell her?" "Yes." Lena looked at him for a moment. He met her eyes without discomfort, without evasion. He simply waited. "Ethan," she said, "what did she actually say to you?" Another pause, shorter this time. "She said she hoped the lanes were treating me well, and that her unit would be filing their route report 2 hours late tonight." Lena decided to think about that later. That evening she found the old man. He was in a back corner of the station, near the maintenance corridors, with a new drink and the look of someone who had decided that staying out of the way was the best available option. His name was Pete Garrow, and he had been living at Dust Point for 9 years, trading small cargo and keeping to himself. He was not happy to talk. But Lena was patient, and eventually Pete Garrow looked into his drink and started to speak. He told her that Ethan Cole had not always been a station mechanic. He told her that there was a reason certain fleet commanders filed route reports late when they spotted him. He told her 2 things plainly, in a low voice, without drama, like a man reciting facts he wished he did not know. The first was about a place called the Kurath Expanse. The second was about a title that certain intelligence agencies used, one that had never been officially assigned to any person, only to what appeared to be a ghost. The third thing Pete Garrow told her, Lena did not expect. She sat with it for a long time after he walked away. The station hummed around her. The lights buzzed. Somewhere in the docking ring, a ship was preparing to leave. She sat there and thought about the quiet man on her ship, currently doing maintenance checks that did not need doing, because he had run out of things that needed fixing. Haveth Crossing looked like a place that took itself seriously. The docking structures were clean and well maintained. The approach lanes were clearly marked. Everything was labeled in 7 languages. There was a kind of deliberate orderliness to it that came not from wealth but from pride. This was a place that had decided it would be respectable and had put in the work to become so. It served as home to the conclave of 7 species, which was the closest thing the mid-systems had to a shared governing body. The conclave did not make laws so much as it maintained agreements, trade arrangements, border understandings, the kind of slow, careful diplomacy that prevented small irritations from becoming large conflicts. It was old work and thankless work, and the people who did it tended to be old themselves. Lena had a simple job. Deliver a sealed cargo of documents to the conclave receiving office, collect her fee, leave. She had done runs like this before. The pay was good, the risk was low, and nobody asked what was in the documents because that was the whole point of sealed cargo. The complication was the passenger. His name was Norrie Vance, and he was 24 years old, which was too young for the work he was trying to do. He was a junior aide to a human diplomat, earnest and quick-talking, with the energy of someone who had not yet learned that most things moved slowly. He needed passage to Haveth Crossing and had paid a fair rate. Lena did not object to his enthusiasm. She did find it tiring after the first hour. Ethan, to his credit, had been patient with the young man. He answered questions when asked, which meant he had said more words in the first day of Nori's presence than he had said in the previous week combined. Nori was fascinated by him in the way young people are fascinated by quiet adults. He kept trying to find the door in. On the second day of transit, while Lena was handling a navigation correction, Nori sat in the common area with Ethan and pulled out the passenger log. Standard procedure. He needed to file the co-pilot's information for the Haveth Crossing Approach Registry. "I just need your full name," Nori said, tablet in hand. "First, last, whatever middle you have." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Not a thinking quiet. Something else. "Ethan Cole," he said. Nori typed it in. He looked at the screen. He looked at it for a few seconds longer than it should have taken to type 2 words. Then, slowly, he looked up. His face had done something complicated. The bright social energy he carried everywhere had gone very still, the way a candle goes still just before it goes out. "You're him," he said quietly. It was not quite a question. Ethan said nothing. Nori looked back at the screen. Then at Ethan. Then he set the tablet down very carefully on the table between them, as if he wanted both hands free. "I read about the Korath expanse in my briefing materials," Nori said. "When I was assigned to the diplomatic office, there was a section marked background reading. Old files." He paused. "They don't use your name in those files. They use a designation." Ethan looked at him with the same flat calm he used for everything. "I'm not going to say anything," Nori said. I didn't expect you to be on a cargo hauler." "Ships need people to run them," Ethan said. Nori nodded slowly, picked up the tablet again, and completed the form. He did not bring it up again. He was quieter for the rest of the approach, which Lena noticed without knowing the reason. Haveth Crossing docking control cleared them in smoothly. Lena went to deliver the documents. She told Nori and Ethan to stay with the ship. Inside the conclave receiving hall, a functionary took the sealed cargo and had Lena sign 3 forms. Standard process. She was done in 15 minutes. She was heading back to the docking bay when she passed a corridor and noticed that it was unusually busy. Aides moving quickly, small clusters of senior staff talking in low voices. She did not think much of it until she got back to the ship. Ambassador Drell was standing at the foot of the loading ramp. He was old, older than anyone she had seen in a long time, with the deep gray color of an aged Kaluan elder and the stillness that came with decades of practiced calm. He wore no ceremonial dress, just plain formal wear. He was alone, which was unusual for someone of his rank. He had his hands folded in front of him and he was looking up at the top of the ramp. Ethan was standing there. Neither of them had spoken yet, as far as Lena could tell. They were just looking at each other across the short distance of the ramp, the old Kaluan diplomat who had been present at 2 interstellar armistice negotiations, and the quiet human who looked like a station mechanic. Then Drell dipped his head. A slow, deliberate nod. The kind that carries weight. Ethan nodded back. Drell turned and walked back into the station without a word. Lena stood in the docking bay and watched him go. Then she looked up at Ethan. He had already turned back toward the ship's interior. She followed him inside and stood in the common area with her arms crossed. "He came down here himself," she said. "He is one of the senior ambassadors of the conclave. He has not left his hall in, I am going to guess years." And he walked down to the docking bay to stand at the bottom of a cargo ramp and nod at you. Ethan sat down. "We have met before," he said. "I need the full story," Lena said. "Tonight." Ethan looked at her for a moment. There was something in his face that was not reluctance exactly, more like the expression of someone who is deciding how much of a long thing to tell. "You probably won't like all of it," he said. "Tell me anyway," she said, and sat down across from him. Outside, Haveth Crossing continued its quiet, orderly business. Ships moved through the approach lanes. Functionaries filed reports. Somewhere in the conclave hall, Ambassador Drell returned to his desk and sat for a long time without picking up any of the documents waiting for him. He was thinking about the things a man could do alone, in 11 days, with almost nothing. The route between Haveth Crossing and their next stop was long and quiet, 2 days of deep transit through a stretch of space that had very little in it. No stations, no relay points, barely any traffic. Just stars at a distance and the low hum of the drift doing its work. Lena made tea. She brought a cup to Ethan. She sat down across from him at the small table in the common area, and she waited. He looked at the cup for a moment. Then he began. 7 years ago, he had been working as a technical specialist. Not military, not intelligence, just a contractor with a background in communication systems and old model drives. Earth's government had sent a single ship to the Outer Rim to investigate reports coming from the colonies along the Koroth expanse. The reports were not dramatic. Just patterns. Supply disruptions. Communications going quiet one by one. Ships that left and did not return on schedule. The ship was called the Hadley. 42 people on board. Ethan was there to look at the communications equipment the colonies had been using, to see if the silence was a technical problem or something else. It was something else. The Veth Dominion had been moving through the Outer Rim for 2 years in what they called territorial consolidation. They were not an empire in the traditional sense, more a federation of aggressive colonial interests backed by a fleet that was good at making problems disappear quietly. They did not announce themselves. They simply arrived, removed whatever resistance existed, and then filed the appropriate paperwork with whatever governing bodies might ask questions later. By the time anyone noticed the pattern, 3 colonies were already gone. The Hadley found out too late. They were hit in open space, in the dark, with no warning. The Dominion did not negotiate. They also did not expect anyone to survive. It was a clean operation. 1 ship destroyed, no witnesses, nothing on record but a vessel that failed to report in and was eventually listed as lost to an unspecified drive incident. Ethan survived because of where he was when the ship was hit. He was in the secondary maintenance bay, in the lowest part of the hull, surrounded by about 6 inches of solid drive housing. The blast that took out the bridge missed him by structural accident. He got to an emergency pod. He sealed it. The pod was damaged but intact. Cracked screen, half a power cell, no propulsion worth mentioning. Just enough to drift. He drifted for 11 days. Lena said nothing. She held her tea and listened. On the first day, Ethan said, he ran an inventory of everything in the pod. Standard emergency equipment, a basic toolkit, a communications unit that could receive but only broadcast on a very narrow band. He charted his position as best he could. He figured out that no one was coming, not because no one cared, but because no one knew where to look and the Dominion's patrol lines were between him and anyone who might help. On the second day, he started listening. The communications unit could pick up Dominion fleet traffic if he tuned it carefully. Their encryption was not simple, but it used a compression format he recognized, an older system, standard across several manufacturers, which he had worked with before. He did not break the encryption. He did not need to. He just listened to the patterns. Timing, frequency, routing. The shape of the traffic told him things the content would have taken too long to decode. By the third day, he understood the Dominion's patrol structure in his sector well enough to map it. By the fourth day, he started using the pod's narrow broadcast to introduce noise into specific frequencies. Not messages, just interference, carefully placed, calibrated to sound like equipment failure on the Dominion's own systems. He explained this part slowly, as if he was not sure how much of it she would follow. She followed all of it. The Dominion's patrol lines communicated through a relay network. Each relay depended on the others. If one went quiet, the others compensated. But if 3 went quiet in a specific sequence, the system flagged a zone as compromised and rerouted all traffic, which meant 2 patrol lines would shift position to cover the gap, which meant 2 other sectors would be temporarily thin. He did not have weapons. He could not disable anything physically. But he could make the Dominion's network believe its own equipment was failing, and he could do it in a sequence that pushed their fleet in directions he chose. Over 11 days, from a broken pod with a cracked screen, he dismantled 3 patrol lines. Not by destroying them. By making them move. He also found their internal administrative frequency and spent 3 days slowly feeding corrupted data into their supply chain records. Wrong coordinates for fuel depots, duplicated orders that canceled each other out, maintenance flags on ships that were operating fine. The Dominion's expansion along that stretch of the rim stalled for 2 years while their own bureaucracy tried to sort out what had gone wrong. They investigated. They found equipment failures, routing errors, administrative confusion. They ran checks on their own people. They never found a person because they never thought to look for one, Not one person, not in a pod, not with half a power cell. They filed their internal report. They concluded it had been an Earth intelligence operation, something sophisticated, something coordinated. They flagged the Outer Rim as a contested intelligence zone and moved their expansion plans elsewhere. Ethan was picked up on the 12th day by a small independent salvager who was not looking for him. He was thin and dehydrated and had not slept more than a few hours across the whole 11 days. He told the salvager his ship had suffered a drive failure. He filed no report with Earth's government. He took a transit back to settled space, finished his recovery, and started looking for work. He did not tell anyone what had happened in the pod. Lena sat with that for a long time. "You stopped a colonial expansion," she said finally. "Alone. In a box." "It was not permanent," he said. "They started again, eventually. Just slower, in other places. And then you came to Verith Station and started fixing ships." He looked at his tea. "Ships need fixing," he said. Lena looked at him. He was the same as he always was. Plain face, plain voice, nothing about him that announced itself. She had been living with him on this ship for weeks, and she had not once felt that she was in the presence of someone remarkable. She had felt she was in the presence of someone competent and calm and occasionally difficult to read. She thought about the Vrithian commander filing her route report late. About Ambassador Drell walking down to a cargo ramp. About Pete Garrow going pale and walking out a side door. The galaxy had been quietly terrified of this man for 7 years, and he had spent those years fixing things that were broken. She did not know what to do with that. So she finished her tea and told him to get some sleep, because she needed him sharp for the approach in the morning. He said good night and went to his bunk. Lena sat alone for a while longer, listening to the drift carry them through the dark. Verith Station looked the same as when they had left it. The same noise, the same crowds, the same smell of engine oil and alien cooking and that unnameable sharp thing in the air. The docking fees had gone up by 2 credits, which was the only change Lena noticed. She had been glad to see it. After everything that had happened, the patrol at Dust Point, the ambassador at Haveth Crossing, the long quiet conversation in the dark of deep transit, Verith Station felt like something solid. It was familiar in the way that a place can become familiar simply by being loud and ordinary and unchanged. They docked in Bay 12, which was 2 bays down from where Ethan had fixed the Grethian hauler on the day they first met. That felt like a long time ago now, though it had only been a few weeks. Lena filed the docking forms, sent her route reports, and made a list of supplies they needed. Normal work. She was grateful for it. The tension began slowly. By the 2nd day, she started to notice that the station felt different. Not different in any way she could point to exactly. More like a building where too many people knew something was happening but nobody was saying it out loud. Small things. Staff moving a little quicker than usual. Groups of beings standing near the docking entrance who were watching the traffic rather than moving through it. Then the 2 ships arrived. The first was a sleek Earth government vessel, dark gray with the quiet authority of official use. No crew markings on the outside, which meant something internal. It docked in the outer ring and filed as a government transit, which technically required no inspection. The second was a Dominion ship. It was not military. It was registered as a diplomatic courier, a small, unmarked vessel with 1 designated envoy aboard. It had filed all the correct approach permissions. There was nothing technically wrong with it being here. And yet the docking staff had let the base supervisor know, and the base supervisor had let the station master know, and by the time Lena heard about it, 3 different species were very quietly moving their own vessels to the opposite end of the docking ring. Ethan said nothing when she told him. He just looked at the docking feed for a moment, then went back to the engine housing he was recalibrating. The Earth officer came first. His name was Con Harlow, a vice admiral, which meant he was senior enough to come himself rather than send someone. He was a solid man in his late 50s with gray at his temples and the bearing of someone who had spent his career making difficult decisions and getting most of them right. He found Ethan in the docking bay working on the drift and stood at the edge of the work area, hands at his sides. Lena stayed nearby. She did not pretend she was not listening. Harlow told Ethan that things were moving again along the outer rim. Not the Dominion this time. Something newer, something that did not yet have a clear name. The early signs were familiar enough that certain people had started paying attention. Earth wanted Ethan in an advisory capacity. Not in the field. Just available. Just willing to talk to the right people when the right questions came up. Ethan listened without expression. When Harlow finished, he asked 2 questions. They were precise questions, the kind that meant he had already processed the larger picture and was checking specific details. Harlow answered both. Then Ethan was quiet for a while. "I'll think about it," he said. Harlow nodded. He left without pressure, without argument. He clearly understood that pushing would not help. The Dominion envoy came 2 hours later. He was a slight figure, formally dressed, with the specific careful politeness of someone who had been sent to do something uncomfortable and had decided to do it with dignity. He did not ask for Lena. He did not ask for the ship's captain. He asked, by name, for the co-pilot of the drift. He had a sealed message. He handed it to Ethan at the foot of the ramp with both hands and a small formal bow, then stepped back and waited. Ethan opened it. He read it. His face did not change at all. He folded it carefully and held it for a moment, then turned and offered it to Lena. She read it. It was written in plain language, formally structured, signed by someone with a long Dominion title she did not fully recognize. The content, stripped of ceremony, said 3 things. The Dominion was aware of his current location and movement patterns. The Dominion wished to make it clear they had no hostile intentions toward him or any vessel he was aboard. And the Dominion would consider it a great courtesy if he chose not to take a professional interest in any of their current activities along the eastern transit lanes. They were asking him, formally and humbly, to leave them alone. Lena read it twice. Then she looked at Ethan. He was watching the envoy with a calm expression. The envoy was trying very hard to look professionally neutral and not quite achieving it. "What are you going to tell them?" Lena asked. Ethan thought about it for a moment. "Nothing," he said. "I'll send a receipt for the message." No other response. "Why?" He handed the letter back to her. Silence worked last time. The envoy received the receipt, bowed again, and returned to his ship. The Dominion vessel undocked within the hour and was gone. That evening, Lena sat at the docking registry terminal and worked through the ship's administrative update. Route logs, fuel certificates, crew documentation. All the small official maintenance that kept a cargo ship legal and moving. She got to the co-pilot entry. The field had Ethan's name in it already. She had filed it weeks ago, on the day she hired him. But it was a temporary entry, the kind that lapsed after 90 days. She needed to make it permanent or remove it. She looked at the field for a moment. She thought about the Vrithian commander who had moved her patrol unit out of their way. About an old ambassador who had walked down to a docking ramp. About a diplomatic message from a colonial power that had, 7 years ago, not even bothered to report the destruction of a small Earth vessel because they assumed no one would care. She typed his name into the permanent record without hesitation. Across the docking bay, Ethan was sitting on a crate with a cup of coffee, looking at a set of star charts spread open on his knee. The charts were for a run she had not yet told him about. He had found them in the navigation files and started reviewing them on his own. He had already made 3 notations in the margins. He glanced up at her briefly, then back at the charts. Somewhere in the Dominion's deep intelligence archive, a file marked with a long designation that loosely translated to the quiet variable was updated that same evening. New last known location, Verith Station. Status, active, non-hostile, co-pilot registered on a civilian cargo vessel. At the bottom of the file, a note that had been there for 7 years and had never been removed still read. Subject appears to have no awareness of the scale of his own effect on regional stability, or is aware and simply does not consider it relevant. Threat assessment remains unchanged. Recommend continued non-engagement. Lena saved the registry entry and closed the terminal. Ethan finished his coffee, rolled up the star charts, and went back inside the drift. The station hummed around them, loud and ordinary and unchanged.